All right, let's discuss the story further. We're joined this morning by Professor Alex van den Heever. He's with the Wits School of Governance. Prof, it's great to see you. Thanks very much for coming on. And I dare say you and I have had this discussion a number of times over the weeks as we've sort of built up to NHI, tried to unpack what it means. I'm quite surprised by what the Health Minister had to say yesterday, the fact that he's very upbeat about it, that he says it's a revolutionary piece of legislation, which, yes, on paper may be true, but fair to say there are still a number of outstanding questions.
Yeah, I think there are many. What you tend to hear are promises about what this arrangement will achieve. You don't really have any real mechanisms and structures that are coherent to back up any of those objectives that they purport to achieve. So I think that at this point in time, we're not really having a debate on the substance of these proposals, and to a large extent, the parliamentary discussions have avoided dealing with the huge gaps in the technical gaps that exist in these proposals.
Yeah.
But while we wait for that debate to happen, we've got a huge problem in that our public health system is failing substantially, and there is no intervention from government to address that.
Yeah, so, I mean, one just needs to cast our minds back to the now former health ombud, Professor Malekapuru Makgoba, who had some scathing things to say about a number of provinces, and perhaps particularly the Gauteng province. He called it an embarrassment. He used a whole range of other descriptors as well. Some of those crucial questions come in the form of accountability. Where will the accountability and oversight mechanisms be? Because I understand the Health Minister will be appointing the board, but there is no parliamentary oversight here.
Well, you can have parliamentary oversight. It absolutely nothing for digital vibes. It's done absolutely nothing for the assassination of Babita Deokaran, the massive theft of resources from multiple hospitals, again, including Tembisa Hospital. We don't see any accountability. No minister's ever being held to account by Parliament. And in the case of digital vibes, Parliament actually refused the Health Portfolio Committee refused to interview him and to ask him questions. So Parliament isn't actually a very effective accountability structure in South Africa today at this point, because essentially you've got a bunch of people singing for their supper. They're not actually there to hold to account the executive of government. So it's a problem in that the way in which you design health systems is to have deep accountability structures that are separate, that there's a separation of powers from the executive of government to the people administering the system. We don't have that, and the National Health Insurance proposals, in fact, deepen that, because every appointment comes via a Minister of Health at the end of the day. It is directed through the top, and that allows for the capture of state institutions. So it's important to note that what's really being proposed here is a centralized procurement structure in which everything in the kitchen sink is appointed by the Minister of Health. And it's a state structure when we look around us, every single state structure that has been established to provide equivalent functions has failed. We don't have a functioning post office. We don't have a functioning railway service, either for logistics or for passengers. We don't have electricity. We have water systems failing around us all over the place. This is the environment within which somebody's proposing a revolutionary state fund that is going to procure, which is the very area that is the source of corruption. That's exactly what people target when corrupt actors operating through the state. They go through the executive. It's the appointments, the capture of procurement structures that allows for the collapse then of state services. So we don't really have a coherent proposal here. What we do have is a very capturable organization that is proposed that quite frankly, that will not achieve any of the objectives that are proposed for it.
Wow. What a damning and scathing account of how government has been able to do its job or not in various sectors across our state. I suppose if government was an employee here and I was looking to hire someone to do this job and I had to look at your track record, there's absolutely no way you'd be considered for this position.
No, not at all. The people that will be appointed into the structure will be a bit like the replacement to the previous ombud. They will have very long relationships with the governing party and with its commercial interests. And that's kind of the pattern that I would expect to see going forward with this. It's important to note that, so that was the health ombud. But the structure that would theoretically accredit providers to be able to contract with this fund is also all appointed by the Minister of Health, the Office of Health Standards Compliance. So these are not independent structures. So there is no accountability structure that is separate from the Minister of Health. Effectively, you can direct everything that comes out, plus you can now make sure that the information that comes out just supports your narrative to a large extent. Well, it is quite hard to hide a collapse of a hospital. But I'm sure that people will attempt to hide non-performance even further than they have been doing at this point in time. And we shouldn't forget what happened to people like Tim de Meyer, where if he did speak out in the case of Rahima Musa Hospital, you are immediately suspended. But if you are corrupt and you steal money from a public hospital, it takes years before there's any accountability and massive investigative journalists to dig into what's been going on before there's any action from the state. But if you speak out about corruption in the state, you're immediately removed or you're assassinated.
Prof, there are a number of other concerns that I wish we had the time to discuss, including, where the money is meant to come from. There's no clarity as well on that score, even though the bill has now been passed. Exactly what will NHI pay for is another of the other issues. But I suppose just to round off our discussion this morning, one of the top lines in the coverage this morning on what happened in Parliament, who voted for and who voted against, is that this takes us a step closer to implementation of NHI ahead of the 2024 elections. How much are next year's elections playing into how this is playing out?
I think this was one of the policies, in 2007 that was talked about. Very little in substance has happened since then. So I think there's huge political embarrassment associated with this policy because effectively nothing's happened. And so they have to pass something. But even if this bill is rammed through into an act, it's very unlikely to hit the ground running. It's not a practical piece of legislation. And the government, at this point in time, the National Department of Health lacks the capability to even do the basics, let alone implement what's in this bill. So very little is likely to happen other than sort of political talk.
Professor Alex van Heever, let me thank you for your time this morning. With the Wits School of Governance, NHI is still firmly on our agenda as we try to understand and unpack it for you.